Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jessica. I like to talk about history, philosophy, theology, Christianity, and Islam. I find it all very interesting. Today, we're going to look at a couple of preconditions that go into a pagan system and a pagan society. As we all are aware of, America was founded on Christian beliefs, but for some reason, America actually resembles more of what Rome behaved and looked like, especially now in America. So without further ado, my name is Jessica. This is Pretty Politics. So I'm just going to go over a couple of the preconditions or pre-characteristics that need to be present before the weird blood, fire, ritual stuff that happens and that you think about when you hear about pagan worship or pagan rituals. You're going to automatically think about a bunch of people in robes and fire and blood and sacrifice. Of course. But there's a couple of preconditions that need to exist before all that stuff happens. The first one is going to be language manipulation. There's going to be a massive change of language, switching of vocabulary, even switching definitions of the vocabulary that's being used to describe certain activities or behaviors. The next would be moral inversion. The moral inversion is going to come after the language manipulation. You're going to manipulate the language to manipulate behavior. Next is going to be the emotional reframing of harm as a virtue. People are going to see something that is actually very harmful, and it's going to be looked at as a virtue or a strength. There's a couple of examples that I could think of just right off the top of my head. So first, language as the first tool. It's a very critical part that language is changed in order to manipulate the masses. So a couple of examples throughout history, the child sacrifice description went from passing through the fire, and you can find that in ancient and religious texts, to offering to dedication. Another example would be temple prostitution, temple prostitution described as a sacred service, and then fertility rites. One more time. Fertility rites. Yeah. That sounds very familiar. Ringing a bell. Like reproductive rights. Like, what the fuck is that? Okay. Violence reframed as appeasement, then balance, and then it's a necessity. So, of course, in order to maintain the balance, which was the previous vocabulary for violence, then you need to do it. It's a necessity. It's a divine order in some cases. So when you manipulate the language and language removes moral friction, it creates shameful acts to neutral terms, and then it empowers through language. This is historically consistent with pagan and moral conditioning. So it's the conditioning of the moral inversion. That's going to be the next step. Okay, another characteristic is sexual boundary erosion. It's super necessary that this happens considering paganism has a lot to do with sensuality, especially the feminine features in sensuality. But in ball-based systems, sexual restraint meant you were repressed. Sexual transgression meant you were enlightened. You had an enlightenment. Modesty was ignorance, and exposure was looked at as freedom. You're freeing your body from the clothes, the cages of the clothes. I don't know if anybody remembers the free the nipple movement that happened in New York City. What the fuck was that? Anyway, why does that happen? So because sexual boundaries anchor the family structure, and to weaken the family, you first weaken the sexual norms and the sexual behaviors. Okay, so what is looked at as progression, especially today, sexual commodification is normalized. Bodies are treated as products or as brands. And desire is elevated over restraint. You can't push abstinence culture or purity culture because it's just unrealistic. Everybody wants to have sex. And it's like society started saying like that was okay behavior. Like, yeah, sure, it's totally okay that this freshly 18-year-old girl has 10 bodies, which matches fertility cult logic, by the way. You guys, I'll do a whole thing about fertility cult logic because a lot of it still happens today, especially in Hollywood. So then we also talked about redefining harm as identity. It's redefining what it means, if it's a virtue or if it's harmful, actually harmful. So historically, ancient systems did this by turning trauma into a ritual. They all celebrated it. It was all normalized. For example, when women would place their oldest son in this statue's arms and rolled them into this oven-like furnace, they played these drums really loudly, but you were still not allowed to cry because it would void whatever blessings would be upon you and society if you did that, because it wouldn't be a sacrifice. Anyway, and then turning injury into initiation. You see this a lot, especially in fertilities or cults or gangs where you have to be injured in order to be absorbed into the societal norm that they have created within themselves. And then once harm becomes an identity, turning suffering into meaning. So like when women would put their newborns on this thing and it would like turn into a no bueno place, it was supposed to bring prosperity and crops and good health and good wealth for the entirety of the civilization that you were living in. So it wasn't just a you thing. It was like I'm sacrificing something that is supposed to be dear to me, dear to society. Even a vulnerable baby should not just be dear to one person. That should be something that everybody finds to be dear and worthy of protection. And so it's a social sacrifice in order to get these blessings through the land from Moloch or Baal. So once harm becomes identity, to question it becomes oppression, to critique it is heresy, and to resist it is violence. I'm going to say that one more time because a lot of the language that I just used is said on mainstream medias today, how something is violent to say. It's very violent that you suggest that women can't go into men's bathrooms and vice versa because you don't have the matching body parts, because you were not born that way. It's not unique to religion. It's actually known in cult mechanisms, turning harm into identity, into a good thing. So the final step would be the reframing the death of the innocent. So I talked about the child sacrifice a little bit. The child was no longer viewed as sacred by not just the mother and father, but by the society. So Moloch worship could not exist until that was present, until the adult's need was elevated above the child's life itself. So when it's more convenient for the adult than the child's life itself, when it was more valuable, the desires and wants for the adult than the life of the child itself. The act was reframed as necessary or compassionate or empowering or beneficial to the community. This really is something that upsets me, my soul, because this is exactly what you hear from pro-choicers, pro-abortioners in comments and on the news. They're like, this is necessary for the mother to finish college. This is necessary because they said the baby could die in birth. This is compassionate because they're not a rich family. This is compassionate because she's a single mother. It's compassionate because the mother was molested and this is the outcome. It's empowering because it's your body and it's your choice and you're a woman and you should have full autonomy over every part of your body unless it has to do with the consequences of sex. And it's beneficial to the community. People will say studies show that when abortion is more available, crime rates go down. What they're not saying is that 7% of the population has over 40% of all abortions in America. What is that 7% demographic? Well, 14% of the population in America are Black. Cut that in half because only women can get pregnant. 7%. So 7% of the population in America has over 40% of the abortions. And then they have the audacity to say that in places where abortion is fully legal at all stages, there's less crime. What is the implication of that? That they are setting up themselves. Anyway, this is why scripture, especially the Holy Bible, reacts so violently to idols like Moloch, because it represents the final collapse of moral order. When the most vulnerable thing in your own community doesn't become important and valuable anymore, the community is done. So when a culture moves from this is so tragic to this is complicated, this is their life, it's not my life, to this is right, it's right that she did that because of these external factors, or this is a virtue, this is good that she did that because of how she got pregnant. That progression mirrors the moral descent described by the prophets, by the way. So there's also important clarification that goes along with this. This system, this ritualistic lifestyle does not require a hidden priesthood. It doesn't require hidden hands, moving everybody around to do these things. Conscious worship. It does not require people, especially the ones who are sacrificing, to know what they're doing, to know that the patterns that they are repeating aren't new. It's ancient. It's older than Jesus. And they don't require coordinated conspiracy. Once a pagan culture has already started, which it did thousands and thousands of years ago, it just changes forms. It doesn't actually end. It changes practices, it changes faces, puts on a costume throughout the centuries and generations. So, and another important thing to note too is ancient people didn't think that these were evil things. They didn't think of them as like from the devil or demons or anything. They actually thought of them as good, and they were wanting to help communities, and they just needed these sacrifices.
My sacrifice goes in the volcano. Then the friendly gods eat up my sacrifice. Very nice. Thank you for the sacrifice. Please have another sacrifice. No, I've had enough for the day. Listen, I'm going to be very insulted unless you have...
And sacrifices can mean anything. They believed that they were being compassionate. Just like the women who are saying, let the coyotes bring as many people over as possible. They're trying to be compassionate about the people wanting to come into America and create a better life for themselves. But they also don't want to acknowledge the fact that over 60% of women and children that are coyoted into America are sexually abused, and a lot of them don't even make it. They thought that they were adapting to reality. They thought that this was a real thing, that this produced real outcomes, and they needed to do their part. They were solving social problems. There were tribes that were fighting, so somebody needed to make a moral sacrifice in order to stop the tribes from fighting. And they thought they were being progressive. They thought that they were progressing society by putting their oldest sons in fire. That's what makes the pattern repeatable. Because of the moral framework that it is given, the base that it hides behind is something that you want to accept as a person with hopefully humanity. So those were just a couple of characteristics, preconditions that need to exist before the act of ritual sacrifice, especially under Moloch and Baal practices and societies. So just take what I have told you, don't take it, apply it to systems of today, especially in the free world, in the Western societies. How are people acting? How are people thinking? How are people talking? Does this look or reflect like any other time in history? Why does America, the freest country in the world at the moment, look more like Rome than ever right now? It's terrifying, especially if you actually know the systems and beliefs of Rome and the Romans, how they behaved, what they believed in, what they practiced. It's just inversion, and it's so fallen. Anyway, thank you guys so much for coming back. If you did come back, all 20 of you, I really appreciate you. And I do notice when you comment or like, or when you watch my stuff, I really appreciate it. I have a Substack. I have a TikTok. Feel free to check them out. I really appreciate you guys. Happy New Year. And we'll be seeing you next week. I'm hoping to come out with weekly videos and just do a little shorter ones, giving you a little bit of history, a little bit of theology, a little bit of philosophy, and a little bit of Christianity if I can sprinkle that in there. Thanks. Bye.